Welcome to another live meetup. I'm starting to do these a little more regularly. Very excited about that because it is an opportunity for you and I to have a discussion, albeit it is the comments section and those are public comments. So it's what I can do for this platform, on YouTube. And I want to be able to have discussions with you about different topics that pertain to how we are able to grow, what experiencing healing is like in practical ways to experience more of the life that God designed, purposed, values, and delights in. We may not always delight in it, but God sees beyond what we do. And I believe that there are practical ways where we can start to experience more of who God is and who we are as we're developing these areas in our lives. Today's topic is particularly interesting in the sense that the concept of who we are, self, is such a critical element in the development. At least for some of us who may be asking questions like, am I being selfish if I say no? If I set a limit and somebody has asked me to do something for them, it's a good thing. Maybe they just want me to pray for them or to um, do a special errand for them or something, and it's difficult for them to do it. So you want to give, but you have been running on empty as it is, and you're tired and exhausted and starting to become like maybe I want to say bitter, but it's there's a lot of frustration that's been building up and you don't foresee any pauses in the future, you might say no. Is it selfish to say no, or is it selfish to set a limit? Somebody else asks you to do X one day, Y one day, Z another day, B, C, D another day, and you don't really want to be doing all that. So you say yes, but you don't want to. Is it selfish now to change your mind or to start going in a different direction? That is um those are some of the questions that I've had, and I believe others have experienced because I'm hearing it from lots of other people. And the question about selfishness may also sound like, am I being selfish if I do something? So, like this whole idea of um, trusting God and obeying God, surrendering to God's will, doing God honoring things is great. It's scriptural. It is biblical. And at the same time, our interpretation and understanding about how that looks gets muddied up, and we can end up in a place where we're saying, "Okay, I'm just trusting God," but now I'm not even actually aware of myself, like what's going on for myself. I'm not aware of my needs because if myself doesn't matter, then I don't have any needs, and so we lose connection actually to God in that process. So let me go in order. I have some bullet points for today's discussion. Um, yes, okay, we've got a couple of people joining today. I agree, and someone Christina has experienced that as well. And from the mitten, greetings from the mitten. I'm not sure where that is, so maybe if you want to share that, James. Um, Let me go ahead and highlight this. So we talked about the question a little bit. Am I being selfish? It can also come up with if I choose something different from what somebody else has told me is important, should happen, is the thing I should work toward or do. If I choose something different, is that selfish? You may have actually heard the question, or not heard the question. You may have actually been told you're selfish because you made a decision that was actually necessary. Sometimes we're changing things and we're growing in different areas and we're trying new things out, and we get it right sometimes and we get it wrong sometimes. That is part of a process of growth and change. When we're trying something new out and someone else sees it as selfish or calls it as selfish, or our brain is going in circles about it being selfish, we can stop the forward progress of growth and healing. that actually helps us experience more life. We can, what's the word that I'm looking for? Self-sabotage in a way, because it doesn't feel okay already to step forward, to make a difficult decision that we want or need or choose when we're not 100% sure that the outcome is going to be exactly the way that we believe it should be and is aligned with God's word and is perfect and all the things. That is scary. But that exploration process is part of growth and healing. It is part of the way that we're designed actually as humans to explore. Little toddlers, when they receive love from a parent, what the next stage is, they're moving into an exploratory stage where they're defining who they are. They're testing, can I try this out? And is my parent, my mom or my dad or the person who loves me still going to be available for me? If I mess up, do they hug me? Do they love me? We're exploring. And sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we experience something exciting and we try it again. So there's just, like I said, a lot of different ways that the question of is this selfish can show up. If you have something different, feel free to put that in the comments of the way that thought shows up in your mind, or the way that it starts to get confusing, muddied in the process of deciding what you want to do or whether or not you should do it. Let's go back to the comments. So the mitten is Michigan, right? Is that, I don't know if I've even got that right. It's Michigan. The hand, the mitten? Yes, mitten. That would be that, like that. Um, my boundaries, I said some people in my life makes family and others angry. Yep. When you haven't had healthy boundaries and you start implementing healthy boundaries, people who do not want you to have healthy boundaries, who want you to do what they want you to do, will probably be upset or are used to you doing what they want you to do or what they expect. Some may be initially upset or confused, but as they think about it, they have that choice to decide how they're going to engage with you in the future when you are consistent with those boundaries. And sometimes it's very painful and difficult, and you need a lot of support systems around you, particularly if someone is very unhealthy and manipulating and trying to get you to do what they want you to do. Sometimes you need additional support to navigate through that. How we view ourselves is a critical piece of distinguishing, is it selfish, self protection, or self stewardship? I'll explain those terms in a little bit so that you have a better frame of reference. The quick highlight is for self stewardship. Self care is a piece of it, but there's a lot more to it. So I'll cover that in just a minute. But our view of self includes how we see ourselves as a human being, our position. A lot of people will say, you need to know your identity in Christ, or I just need to cling to my identity in Christ. I always ask, well, what does that mean? What is your identity in Christ beyond the words you've been told you should believe and live from? What a lot of us experience is this placing onto another person or placing onto ourselves the phrases, the verses, and the words that we should believe and cling to that, but it isn't connected to what's going on in here. So, for example, if I say, I know my identity is in Christ because Christ says that I am redeemed, I am, all these things that God says about who we are, about how we are his child, all those phrases and verses are great. And sometimes when we're reading scripture, that is really ministering to us and we receive God's comfort, his love, and his acceptance in those moments. But just because we're saying and reciting those scriptures, those verses, those phrases, doesn't equal the impact of being those things like loved, cherished, child of God. When we've had other experiences that counter our ability to fully receive and live from the truth of God's proclamation of who we are, we need to explore that And my concern in a lot of Christian communities is that our focus tends to be now I'm sinning or I'm failing, taking on shame, etc., because I'm not living as if I know that I'm redeemed, I'm a child of God, those things that we know that we're supposed to believe. And I say that God offers space for us to be able to experience how he sees us that helps our nervous systems settle, our minds settle down, and in that breath, taking in what it feels like to be loved and accepted, even when we mess up, even when we're completely confused, when we don't have it figured out, especially when we're not supposed to be figuring it all out. So I'm starting to go off on another tangent. I want to bring it back to my first point, which was about our view of self. When it's not defined, it is very difficult to be clear when you need to make a decision of whether it's selfish or something else, to know what could be helpful for you in next steps. When we don't have a definition of who we are, I visualize it kind of like a puddle or a blobby mass that does not have any framework around it. And God says, like, this is how I see you. I designed you this way. You have these gifts. You have this wisdom and the discernment that I put in you because of the Holy Spirit. You have also some specific experiences that you've had, and like all these things that are part of who we are. And when we don't have that defined, this kind of blobby place is also impacted by all the others outside of us. So they're trying to put a framework around us and decide how we fit, what we're supposed to fit into, or they're not framed either. So their blobbiness is kind of connecting with our blobbiness. I don't know if you've ever seen, like I watch some science fiction shows, and there's generally like some kind of a substance. Maybe it's this alien substance, and another one comes along, and then they mesh and they become melded together. Definition separates the two unique, different people, still humans, still designed by God, still equal in value by God, but different, unique, defined individuals loved by God, his creation. When we have this place of who we can identify some really important elements that I'm going to cover with these other terms. Okay, so keep this picture in mind, this identification of who we are, the defining picture, if that's helpful for you. I know not everybody's visual in that way, so that may not be as helpful of a picture as something else. Another concept about our view of self, which I wrote about in an article years ago, how to know if it's self-devalue or, let's see, how did I put it? Self-denial or self-devalue. Because when we don't feel loved and accepted, when we don't feel valued, there's reasons that we don't. Um, but we can be in a position where we have also denied who we are, denied that we have the value, even though our brain is saying it, our heart isn't believing it, and the things that we walk out are from a place of, well, I don't really need anything. Let me tell you how this looks spiritually. In a call it kind of hyper spiritual is when we're using spiritual concepts to bypass the core, the emotions, the reality that is our experience and where God actually meets us. Where there's a term called spiritual bypassing. And how this might look in this scenario is I don't need anything. God is all I need. I just need to trust God. I'm good. I'm going to give to others over and over and over again because I don't need anything. That is denying reality. It's denying who you are. And that makes my heart kind of hurt because I know that what that feels like. And I see it around me all the time, all the time. We want to be good Christians. We want to do the right thing. We want to try to get everything right. And when we deny ourselves, we are denying the reality of our experiences and the place where God meets us in our vulnerability. And we're also denying the value that God sees in us. When I think of being in that position of always saying, I don't need anything, I just trust God, everything's good, it's all good, it's all God. No matter what I'm going through, it doesn't matter. No matter how people treat me, doesn't matter. No matter how much people have taken from me or violated or all these different things, I'm good because I got God and that God is all I need. That also puts us in a place of, well, this is the way I look at it. If everybody did that, who's actually receiving when we're giving to someone else? Are we all just putting our hand up and saying, no, I don't want to receive from you anything good because I'm giving to you? It doesn't really work very well. Did you ever see the movie, which one am I thinking of? I think it's maybe it's Robin. It's either Robin Hood or Jungle Book, the Disney cartoon movies, the old ones, where the two birds, I think they're vultures, are sitting up in the tree. And he says, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And he goes back and forth because nobody in that scenario is defined or maybe okay with having an opinion. Maybe they just don't know. But like they said, but the scenario plays out with believers too. No, I'm just going to give because I'm supposed to martyr myself. And at the core of that, I would suspect significant incidents, pains beforehand, or situations where you were devalued, dismissed, denied reality, denied truth, denied the reality of what you experienced, denied the reality of how it impacted you, dismissed in when you tried to share or tried to process through it, and others said, no, 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 you just have to do something different. It can put you in a place of denying who you are and having value, the kind of value that God has for us to be able to take that in. So, self, that defined picture of self, includes who we are and what we do. It's probably not the best description out there. I'm sure people have different descriptions. You know, people will talk about all kinds of things around a self, but even the self concept is something that a lot of us may avoid because of the way it gets off track, absent God, or away from God, or rejecting or rebelling God. I think I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But God created each of us. So the self includes his design in us and our responsibilities. So I want to check in on the chats. Yes, I need to keep his words close in remembrance. Love the pictures. Thank you for letting me know that the pictures are helpful. They definitely come to my mind. I share them. If they're helpful, great. If they're not, that's fine. I get it. Everybody works a little bit different. That's part of understanding I am me, you are you, and that's okay. And we can still meet with our differences. In the view of self, there's also this realm of what belongs to us. The way that can get off kilter and maybe move us into selfishness or self protection, or not off kilter, moving into self stewardship, is when we're not taking the right responsibilities or we're taking on responsibilities that are not ours. We may miss being responsible for what's ours to manage, and we may try to manage other people's responsibilities. And that blobbiness, because it's not sure. Like, I don't even know where do I end? Where do you begin? What's the difference between the two of us? I'm not okay being me. So now I'm going to take on your opinion, your thought, and those opinions and thoughts go deeper and deeper, causing us to either shrink down or to rise up against. That's even a nervous system response where we're shutting down or we're withdrawing, or fighting up against. With different reactions in different people, it looks differently. But still, there could still be that core thing and it just could show up differently. Let's go into the term selfishness. what is actually selfishness? Hopefully, this defining the terms will be helpful as you're sorting through if this comes up in the future. Am I being selfish? Is this selfish to do this or to do that? Oh, I forgot a comment. Goodness, that James shared, guilty of spiritual bypassing. Yeah, me too. Whew, even look back at some of my blog posts and say, you know what? That is not the perspective I want to be sharing anymore. So we're going to update that and provide something different. Okay, going back to the concept of selfishness. If somebody else is saying you're just being selfish, or we're hearing that for ourselves, and we already believe that we should be giving up for other people, or have a fear of being selfish or being seen as selfish, we have some kind of an experience that can quickly grab that statement from somebody else or in our own minds about being selfish, believe it, and then shut down the progress like I was talking about before. Because it doesn't feel okay to take care of yourself, to have needs, to have wants or desires, to have a passion. It doesn't feel okay to explore that. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. The way I would see selfishness, and I don't even really like the term because I believe it also gets misused or used as a hammer and a weapon in some sense in our own minds or with other people in Christian communities to say, no, 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 it's just selfish. You don't want to be prideful. Like there's all these other beliefs and these scriptures that go along with that concept. The meaning that is part of that is now you're bad, you failed, you're a bad person, and we can focus on the selfishness as just being a sin that is something we did wrong and now we need to fix, which actually I don't find helpful, and I don't find that obviously sin is a scriptural principle, but the way that I'm trying to share about this is when someone says you just did something wrong and now you got to try to do the right thing, that is not necessarily a spiritual concept because it brings us back to focusing on ourselves, actually. So the irony is the way I'm going to define selfishness is when we're focused on just trying to get the right next thing done and not being selfish, we can end up being selfish. And I'm going to give you my term and definition. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it though, because I'm still processing this and I'm exploring these concepts and trying to figure out what's most helpful for other people as well. Selfishness would be focused only on yourself at the exclusion of others, regardless of spiritual impact, regardless of what you sense God saying, regardless of anything else. Very self-centric, self only positioning. And I even say that with a little bit of a caveat because I think that it needs to include some sort of a definition about self is the only one that matters. When I think of pride showing up and self at the exclusion of others in the content or the context of selfishness, I also think of the kind of pride that means it's all about me and only ever going to be all about me. So there's a distinction in there that I think is really important as we're exploring these different concepts, because there are times when we need to step back to focus only on ourselves so that we can engage well in relationships, so that we can have something to offer another person. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. Let's say you are that person who has not said no, who does not set limits, and people keep asking you, and now they're starting to ask for even more, or another person is asking, and you keep saying yes, 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 because it's good, because you should, because you feel guilty if you don't, and you're going and going and going. And then you're reaching that place where that bitterness, or that just like you're constantly irritated and frustrated, and actually you're thinking like, I don't want to be with them. I'm irritated by this and this about their personality, or all these different things can come up. Those are a sign that we're giving beyond our capacity and beyond maybe what God has called us to actually do, they can be a sign of that. When that's happening, and when you haven't had definition, when you haven't had clarity on who you are, or allowed yourself to have a want or a need that is for you, allowed yourself to receive and take in what God has for you, the selfishness question can come up a lot, and you may need to pull back and first define who you are by taking time to rest, to reflect, to pray, to enjoy, to make choices that do care for you, in the sense that, like, no is caring for you, setting a limit, letting someone know that you're not able to do something, even if you want to. You can even say, like, I would love to, unfortunately, I'm just not able to right now. Um, you don't have to give more than that. Context matters and relationship matters a lot, and those types of things. Um, you may need to, well, for example, when we came back from the ranch, I had worked, and given. I had to just start saying no, and also, oh, like, remind myself, no, you're not even going to offer. Okay, I'm going to check in with Christina. I base my yes and no on my emotional capacity if I can do it. I don't know if that's right. That is another good point. Just a little segue into that. So that would, I'd like to actually address that separately, but I think it's going to come up in some of the points that I'm going to make today, because when we're reflecting in the emotional capacity, sometimes God does call us to go beyond our capacity. But when we're constantly doing that, we don't have any capacity. And so, an honest reflection of what the capacity is and what amount could even be stretched can be helpful in that place. Again, it's a visual for me, like a rubber band. There's flexibility. Sometimes it feels like it's less, and sometimes you're really stretching it out even more. It doesn't feel like you ever could do it, but you're doing a little bit more. You're stepping into something that's a little bit, yeah, like I'm still growing. That's a little bit of a next step, maybe, versus I'm going to take that rubber band and now it's dry, it's cracked, it has not received any. I don't even know if you can care for a rubber band, but you know how, like, leather gets also dry and cracked, and you can put oil on it and moisturize it and keep it more supple, more soft. But when that rubber band has become worn out, and then you try to stretch it and put it over something, you can't even do the stretching that you were able to do before. You can't even try to get that stretch because it's going to snap before you even get there. That's a pretty good, um, that to me kind of helps me see, what place am I at? Is this really God stretching me? And I'll ask the Spirit, show me, do I need to be stretched in this area? What would you like me to do? And as I continue to lean into listening to God and seeking His voice, then and as I'm also undoing the unhealthy beliefs that distort God's voice, then I feel like I can have a better understanding of, I'm at beyond max capacity, and now I have to step away because I've gone beyond what actually I should be doing. That is a process over time for sure. Definitely hard to define selfishness when buried in giving. Yeah, and there are a lot of other concepts that I'm not going to cover today that do apply to this idea of selfishness too, and the distinction for giving. But I'll say one quick principle on that is, when you're trying to do something for someone else that they've already decided not to do for themselves, they're unwilling to do it for themselves, or they can do it for themselves, or yeah, so, like, if they can do it for themselves and they've chosen not to, they're unwilling to do it, or they're not, oops, they're not motivated to do it. We want to try to do things for another person. I want to make sure that my audio is okay. Oh yeah, it's coming through the Samson anyway. Okay. We can be giving sometimes out of a desire to appease our own anxiety and the guilt and shame. We can be giving because we're assuming that our understanding of what someone else needs is what they need. Sometimes that happens without even asking them. So, like I said, there's a lot else that goes with it. Let me come back to the point of the selfishness, self-centered, self-focused, only self, without concern that it's ever going to be about anybody else. And the difference that I was sharing before is sometimes we do have to come back and check in and get more definition. What matters to me? What is my values? What do I want to do? And then, God, could it be okay to even want this? Like, I may feel drawn to try something new, a gift, a hobby, or a career, or something like that. And I'm, it might be a thought process that says, I can't do that career because it's not directly this spiritual concept. And yet, God is working through that so that other people see God through you in the career, for example. So, getting a little bit of clarity in talking to God about the next step that you want to take and doing that testing and exploring a little bit. Let me go into self protection for a minute. Let me just grab a drink of water. Okay. Before I mentioned the focus of the sin focus that becomes like a hammer, and you must do this or else this, that's adding more shame and actually keeping us from receiving good things from God. And sometimes when we're focusing on sin as the problem, when that is our focus, our lens, what we miss is that the reaction or the behavior, the choices that we or someone else makes is out of not being motivated to be against God. That doesn't mean that it can't be destroying and that it can't be a sinful thing. I want to break through the motivation and something else that can be happening in some cases. When we've had overwhelming situations in our lives that have impacted us as a trauma event, it may be a specific trauma that you're thinking of, or as a really even overwhelming stress event, it can impact our nervous system. It impacts our brain, the way the brain processes, like literally neurologically, paths in the brain can shift. And what we believe we don't have the capacity to live out, or we're taking in so much of the enemy's distorted messages, and that's even affecting chemistry in the brain, etc. But when it hasn't been, when you haven't had the opportunity for a very stressful or traumatic event or series of events to process through the body and the mind, it can build up in the nervous system and in places in the body that we're not even aware of until many years later, and sometimes too late. Because those are already in our bodies and our minds and our physiology, we can have reactions from that are like a traumatic response. Let me give you an example from when we were fostering. Actually, let me give you an example from our dog, the dog that we had for several years. When we first got her, she saw a broom and she immediately peed on the floor and went under the chair, shaking. That was a traumatized response. Clearly, something happened to her, most likely with a broom. And so she peed on the floor. Not what I would have wanted to do, but I'm not going to get angry with her for that particular response. That was more of like a shutdown response. So we can get upset with somebody for not taking steps, for not taking an action, when it's a self-protection measure to conserve resources, to conserve energy, to protect themselves. They don't know yet that it is that they can make it through. Like, there's a lot of things I don't want to get too convoluted in this concept. Um, Christina says, yes, my mind used to freeze. Processing is essential. Yeah, processing is really helpful for the brain to be able to allow some of it. in processing, not just for the sake of not just always having the motion, because like there are times when we can get stuck in certain cycles, but yeah, processing is literally letting it come from here out and in the body out. So in the self protection, when we don't when our brain has some kind of a signal that something isn't safe, it doesn't even have to be anything that makes sense to other people for whatever reason, past experiences, filters, misread cues, etc., can signal the brain something isn't safe. What the brain does is it moves into that fight, flight, or freeze response. It goes into action to protect yourself. It's designed to protect you. When we've had that and it hasn't been processed and it isn't and it's still kind of stuck in there, then we have all these reactions that are coming from an unhealed place. So we may still do things that are damaging and sinful, but if we don't acknowledge the self-protection design that God actually put in us, we miss what we need to help us be able to respond better, um, greater capacity without shame. Our signals, though, of what is safe and what's not safe, or when we need to like rise up against and fight against something, or shut down and say, nope, never mind, I'm not saying anything because it's obviously you don't want to hear from me. Like that's kind of a shutdown response. That's I'm going to deny myself in that. You just need to be the one that's sharing all your opinions because again, I don't matter. When those original signals were in place, there's a reason that they went off. The um, designed to keep us safe. So let's say a you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. This is usually a lot of times this is the example that we'll hear about in some of the training that I have. The bear or a tiger or something like that. If you see something like that, you're probably gonna freak out a little bit. Maybe it's so overwhelming because not only do you freak out, but there's all these other things. You have to maybe you have somebody small that you're taking care of or an elderly person that's with you, and all of a sudden your brain is going, "Oh my gosh, and now I got to keep them safe and me safe, and what is the bear going to do?" And all these things are rising up in the system. And then somebody comes along and all the events that play out afterwards, there's never any space for to recover from all that was already like heightened. So then later, you're walking in a forest somewhere and you see a fragment of something that your brain interprets as that bear or tiger, but it isn't. The same reactions show up in the body, right? That's a nervous system response from past situations. And that can play out long term and prohibit us from being able to do things that we want to do. It can increase anxiety, it can increase shame, it can increase like this weight that we feel and the fog from not being able to respond differently because our signals, safety signals, have gotten off kilter. So we need new experiences and new pathways to be able to retrain the safety signals. And then you won't need to protect the way that you did in the past. Or if you're a child who's experienced neglect or absent parents or really dismissive caregiving, you may have learned to protect yourself because you had needs that weren't getting met. But today you're an adult, and so the process of retraining the brain and the body can help you reduce those self-protective actions and choices. Self-stewardship is the term I use. I use two main terms especially in Cultivate Together in the growth community. Self-stewardship, soul stewardship. Soul stewardship being about managing how our hearts and souls are impacted, like our thoughts, our wills, our attitudes, our heart, our emotions, our experiences, how we experience being loved by God, how we are able to even experience being accepted and living in the identity of Christ into our design. Like, that is a soul experience. Self-stewardship is how we show up. So we're developing who we are and how we show up. And in this concept, when I was titling it for the video, I'm also thinking of that definition of self. So the way that we show up as the person that we've now learned and developed that we are, if that makes sense. Like we're developing who we are, developing our understanding, responding to God as the Spirit's revealing, being able to take in more of the good, processing the emotion, experiencing the Spirit's guidance, etc. And from that place, when we have these things deposited, or when we're able to access the things that God has already given us, when we're choosing to access things that God has already given each of you, we can make a decision out of that that is a response because it's there. I may still feel scared to make this decision, but I'm going to choose it. And the stewardship part kind of also is a picture of structure and framing in the sense that when we know who we are, we're also caring for what belongs to us. Stewardship is tending, caring, managing well what is actually ours to manage. We don't want to be managing somebody else's responsibility, and we do it all the time. It's like, hey, neighbor, I want to come over and I really want to fix your yard and landscape it and do all these different things. And ours isn't being taken care of. That's not honoring ourselves or God. And it's actually not honoring the other person either. It feels like it sometimes because we're trying to give and give and give, and that can make us feel good sometimes. And that's a warm direction. Okay, I'm missing something there in that comment, but feel free to add more because I'd love to hear more on that. In the self-stewardship frame, that structure, what's included are a lot of the concepts that are talked about in the boundaries concepts that define what belongs to us, our thoughts, our choices, our attitudes, our actions, our gifts, our experiences. I include all of that because we are responsible for that. When we're not stewarding and managing ourselves well, we are not only giving beyond what we have to give, but we can be doing it from a place of, I don't know that pride is really the right word, but this sense inside of ourselves that because we don't matter, we're going to give to others. We can also be in a place of saying, I'm going to rescue you. You made the wrong decision. I see the right decision. And I'm going to rescue you. And now I've tripped over into your place and I'm trying to be responsible for you. Meanwhile, back here, neglecting what is mine. We are to take responsibility for what is ours and ownership for what is ours and only ours. Other people may have placed responsibility on you that does not belong to you. When you're an adult and people are constantly telling you this is what you have to do, particularly if those people are not also the people who are with you when you're hurting, when you're sad, when you're angry, like they're able to be present with you in all the experiences in a sense where you feel comforted and calmed and joined. They may just be off in a distance saying, this is what you're supposed to do. Um, and we can take that on as, of course, that's what we should be doing because they said it. They have authority. Maybe it's the pastor at church. Maybe it's a leader. Maybe it's a speaker. Even if I'm saying something and you value it, you are the one who gets to decide. This is what matters to me. This is something I want to do. It's not mine to manage. I'm here responding because I believe this is the passion and the call that God has given me to share to help other people, and the giftings that He's put in me. And you have your own giftings and your own experiences. They're going to filter what you need, what you want, what you value, and they're also going to filter what you need in the moment. So your motivation level. When I said before, we may be trying to do something for someone else and they're not even motivated to do it. they may not have the awareness that they need to, or they may not care that they need to. They may not actually even need to. The motivation is going to make a big difference. We might be highly motivated because we're actually uncomfortable that they're making the other decision. But if they're not motivated, we do not have control over that. We got to come back to what's our responsibility. In that scenario, it might be increased anxiety, increased worry and concern and fear and distress because they're not doing something specific, especially when it's a loved one. That's ours to manage. When it's really overwhelming to manage, we need some additional support or therapy and coaching, etc. We've talked about defining self, selfishness, self-protection, and self-stewardship. And the question I have is it sinful to care for self? How do you know? And I'm not going to give you like a really bullet point, clear distinction on this. More food for thought, ways to start exploring. Because we can think that some things are sinful based on some of the things that I might say when we're still not able to value ourselves at all, and we're obviously doing something wrong all the time, then it can feel sinful to do everything. And it's difficult to discern what is actually okay. My question is, what's driving you? Really? What's motivating you? Really? Are you motivated because you're stewarding what's yours to manage? Or are you motivated because something inside of you is distressed? It's a trauma response. It's a nervous system response. It's a um, even it could be an arrogance to say, no, of course I know. I've got the answer. God's already shown me. I know what I'm supposed to do. I just need to do it. What's driving you? Is there room for the Spirit to reveal and to guide you together, two people actively exploring together? We respond in asking for God to speak, but that's not the only part that we do. We don't just ask God to speak and then respond. Sometimes He's already spoken and we're denying what He said to us and not responding to that. So then when we ask the second time, because we don't sense that anything else, we don't necessarily hear from God in that sense, we can still go back into being self-sourced because we're giving up. We're becoming passive. We're saying, oh, obviously, I tried to ask God what He wanted from me, and since I didn't hear anything, I'm not going to do anything, when He's actually shown us before. Or He's given us other ways to discern and know. Or He's given us space and grace to test and to try things, to fall down and get back up. So what's driving? Is the Spirit revealing? Is it relying on the Spirit with response versus relying on yourself? Going back to something I mentioned before, and this distortion that we can have around whether or not we're being self-reliant and thinking that we are being spirit reliant, kind of that spiritual bypassing concept. We can think that we're relying on the Spirit, but when we're really honest and have space for the true reality of what we've felt, what we've experienced, what our thoughts are as they show up without judgment, we move into that place of self-denial, and that keeps us separate from living and receiving from the Spirit, keeps us feeling disconnected with God, limited in our ability to connect with God. And that's heartbreaking too. All this focus that can be done on getting it right and trying to do the right thing and not need anything for yourself, because the best way to be a Christian and a good Christian is to do all these things and follow all these commands and trust and obey all the things the way we understand it. And the outcome is we end up constantly drained, overwhelmed, fearful, anxious, filled with shame, and unable to live from the core place of being loved and accepted and valued by God, who designed us and put us in the position to manage and steward our lives. So I'm going to wrap it up because this is a lot of, I've talked about a lot of concepts today. I'd love to know what resonates the most with you. I'd love to know any questions that you have or something that doesn't even, like, is kind of just niggling, what's the word, on you, and you're not sure what to do with it, we're processing. We are always in process. God is in the process of redeeming and restoring. That process is a messy space. And I put this up on Instagram and Facebook the other day that I believe grace is a space that allows that messiness where we can also experience God's love and acceptance and belonging and value. Not just telling ourselves we're supposed to do it, but that exploring, defining, bringing it back to God. Okay, I tried this. Oh, wait, you know what? I don't really think that was a good idea. And maybe that wasn't honoring you, honoring myself, honoring other people. I'm going to try something different. And maybe sometimes we have consequences. When we're growing and when we're leaning into the Spirit, we're also infused with more courage as well as capacity to make it through if there is a consequence, to admit the wrong, the failure, without feeling the shame and the burden and the weight of it all that keeps us from doing anything else. My hope and prayer for each one of you is that you will experience a deep breath in your spirit as you let these topics and principles just kind of, what's the word? Meld isn't the right word, but like just hold some space inside of you and allow God to speak. What is He saying to you about who you are? And if He's saying something that every part of you is pushing against to say, oh, well, yes, I know that's true, but, or of course I know that's true. Consider just pausing, choosing to take it in. Thank you, God, for showing me this. Maybe I think I already know it, or maybe I'm trying to know it. I'm doing everything. Doesn't even matter. I want to pause and just receive what it is you're showing and revealing to me today. Allow me to take that in. It's not always easy to do. And I offer maybe 5 seconds just to be intentional and take that in. Start breaking the patterns of pushing it away or deciding that no, you don't have to take that in because you already have enough good and you're supposed to be able to be strong enough to do all the things. Take that in. Okay, so I'm going to go check on the comments really quick. James says he was the handyman, always trying to fix things for everyone but myself. I can see that. I can see that happening. And filtering others' truths. Right. Yeah. And, in that filtering others' truths, we could take on someone else's emotional response as our responsibility. There's a big difference between honoring the other person and honoring yourself in a situation, knowing that they may be angry or sad or hurt in response to a decision that we make or something that we need to do. But when what we're doing is actually honoring both ourselves, what we're managing, and theirs, what they need to manage, it's something we need to learn to tolerate. We need to build the skills to navigate. So those are some of the things that we do in the group calls. And the next steps is another group call that I do and Cultivate Together, where we're exploring like what's next for me, what would be a helpful next step, so that we can break things down into something that's bite-sized or apply the specific principles and the different teachings that I offer. And how does this look in my particular life? There's different ways that we can practice some things in communication and even building some of that tolerance level for my own distress or other people's distress. Those are some of the things that we work on as a group in Cultivate Together. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I will be posting the upcoming live meetups. The time and dates may switch a little bit because I have something else coming up on Tuesdays, but I will put that information in the newsletter. You'll see it on the YouTube channel. You can always get the Notify Me notification on it at least a week in advance. I'm not sure. Well, I don't always put it up that early, but I'm working on that and even coming up with some titles. So there's a form. If I didn't put it in the description already, I'm going to add it, but there's a form that I have available where you can request topic specific content. So when I get those requests, it kind of gives me a list, and that helps me know the people who are already engaging with me, what do you want to hear about so that I can prioritize content that matters to you, or maybe tweak something and make sure that I address a specific question where you have a content idea, and we could do this as a meetup. If you're like, hey, I have some questions, I just want to meet up with you on that live meetup that you do and ask some questions and see if we can get some, conversation going about it. I love doing the live meetups because it's casual. I don't have to do a lot of editing, but it gives me an opportunity, especially to hear from you and to have direct engagement with you. I love being able to do that. So thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Take care. Bye bye.